The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog has warned of a grave crisis unfolding at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. He was addressing an emergency session of the UN Security Council as Moscow and Kyiv trade accusations of the new shelling near the nuclear facility. As fighting in the area continues, the US is backing calls for a demilitarised safe zone around the Zaporizhzhia plant. Ukraine says that Russia has turned the site into a military base for launching attacks. Well, Dr. Alex Rosen is with the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and he joins me now. Dr. Rosen, thanks for joining us. Welcome to DW. How concerned are you, or should we be, in fact, about shelling at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant?
I'm afraid very concerned. We've been watching the situation in Zaporizhzhia for the past 8 years now. You remember the initial fighting in eastern Ukraine started in 2014. And it's just a very, very dangerous site. It's Europe's largest nuclear plant, and it's basically the most vulnerable piece of infrastructure that you can imagine in a country at war.
Well, it seems the IAEA agree with you on that, but some experts say that the danger is quite localised, so obviously terrible for the local residents, but not necessarily likely to cause a wider nuclear disaster. What do you say to that?
Well, as we all know, in war, there's always collateral damage. You remember the situation in the Kosovo War where NATO accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy. I mean, who is to say that Russia, in its almost indiscriminate shelling, does not cause damage to one of the Ukrainian nuclear power plants? And the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is dangerous because it's not just the biggest nuclear complex in Europe, but it also contains a lot of spent fuel ponds. So any damage, be it from sabotage, cybercriminality, shelling, or accidents, would cause a really widespread disaster depending on the direction and the strength of the wind. And this in itself is a big danger because one side could inadvertently or actually on purpose use this as, I would say, a kill switch. I mean, it's a piece of infrastructure in a country grappling with war. And if you cause a disaster there, if you cause a meltdown, this would, depending on the wind direction, cause widespread destruction and make large parts of the country uninhabitable for decades, if not centuries.
Of course, something similar to Chernobyl, which of course is at the forefront of everyone's mind when we talk about this. How different is this situation to what happened in Chernobyl?
It is the first time in history that we are actually seeing war in a country with a nuclear infrastructure. It's a new situation, but one that we as nuclear critical scientists have been warning about for decades. Nuclear power plant is dangerous in itself in peacetime. But during wartime, it becomes a kill switch. It becomes the most vulnerable piece of infrastructure that a country can have. And hitting it would not just cause strategic and tactical problems for the country, but it would spread across national borders because, as we know from Chernobyl, if you have a meltdown, a national border does not stop the nuclear cloud or the radioactive cloud from spreading, depending on where the wind takes it.
Well, certainly not helping to ease any concerns there, Dr. Rosen. Thank you very much for your time today. International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, many thank you. Well, to better understand how worried we should be and indeed how worried the experts are about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia plant, I asked Dr. Geraldine Thomas, a radiation expert from Imperial College London.
I think there's a concern for the workforce who are working there, basically at the point of a gun. It's never wise to do anything stupid around any major infrastructure plant, whether that's a chemical or a nuclear plant. But I think in terms of potential worry for people further afield than the immediate area, I don't think that's a major concern for us. These places are extremely well protected, and even a direct hit on one of the two reactors probably would not mean that there would be a breach and radiation would be released. If that's the case, then it would only be the local area that would suffer the consequences. As we saw around Chernobyl, it was the local area that really suffered any consequences. Further afield, you're not going to get significant amounts of radiation. So I think in terms of Western Europe, it is not something that we need to be concerned about. But it sure is a worry for the local population. But you have to remember, it's a terrible situation there at the moment. They're in the middle of a war, which is infinitely more dangerous to them than anything that could happen at the nuclear plant.
Experts are warning, though, of a potential nuclear disaster. What do you say to those warnings?
Well, I don't like the term disaster because I don't think it would be a disaster for the wider population. I think any release of radiation will cause concern, but if we look at what happened after Chernobyl, where there was a completely unregulated release, it was only the local area that was severely impacted. People like to think there were impacts further on, but that's just not true. So it would be a release of volatile isotopes like iodine and cesium. Iodine has a very short half-life, so it wouldn't get very far away from the plant. And cesium, we know, has not caused any major health problems in the population, even around Chernobyl. So I think we need to be cautious. And I certainly wouldn't want to be one of the people working there. I think it's an impossible situation for them to be working in it. I think that is the major concern, is the local population working at the plant. To be quite honest, it would be really stupid if you tried to do anything in that area, because it would be the Russian soldiers and the Ukrainian nationals around the plant who would suffer most.
Of course, those people around the plant, indeed. How is this situation, or is it different from what happened in Chernobyl?
Oh, totally different from what happened in Chernobyl. What happened in Chernobyl was a major accident to a reactor that was actually working at the time. Here we're looking at a potential strike by an explosive weapon that would probably not even get through the containment facilities that surround these reactors nowadays. It's a very different design of reactor. So I think we need to, be concerned for the locals, but I don't think it's a major concern for the rest of Western Europe.
All right, Dr. Geraldine Thomas, radiation expert from Imperial College London. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.